I'm joined now by the panel. Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today. Juanita Tolliver, Democratic strategist and an NBC News political analyst. And Republican strategist Brad Todd. And Juanita, I want to start with you. Yesterday, these 14 Senate Democrats signed this letter calling for a cessation of hostilities. Where does this say about where the mainstream Democratic Party is on this issue right now?
Well, the first thing it says is they're still negotiating language, because cessation of harm is not quite ceasefire. Right. It's a little bit more than a humanitarian pause, so I think those internal conversations
Pause, ceasefire. Yes. The White House has been trying to walk this fine line, hasn't it?
Right, consistently. And we know that Secretary Blinken has had to do the same when he's on the ground in Israel speaking to the government officials, because I think it's something to be said about the Biden's track record and how he went into this conflict. Remember, first it was Israel, defend yourself. We're not going to draw any red lines for Israel was the line. And now he's backtracking. Then I think that has something to do with the response from the American people as well.
American people, but also, Susan, the response from some key swing states, right? We've heard in Michigan that Muslim Americans, Arab Americans have been responding very negatively to this. And I was in, Minnesota earlier this week speaking with some voters there. They seem very upset with how the Biden administration is handling this issue.
In the biggest picture, the Biden administration is also concerned that Israel is going to isolate itself in the world, and that this is going to be a problem as you try to figure out what comes after the war in Gaza. But in the United States, yes, a bigger divide than we've seen in the past on issues involving the Middle East and Israel. And the groups that we see expressing the most concern are liberals and young people. Younger voters have much more sympathy and concern about the plight of Palestinians than older voters do. And these are voters that President Biden really needs to be on his side and energized to turn out next year.
Do you think? Go ahead.
Well, hold on. This is a Democratic problem. The independents and Republicans are almost all staying with Israel. And it is the job of Joe Biden to lead his party to the right answer here, which is to call for surrender. It is a call for the surrender of Hamas, period. End of story. Full stop.
He did that to begin with.
That's what he needs to do right now. And if you note the Democrat letter you talked about, they said, let's have an increased focus on the hostages. They didn't say Hamas should release the hostages. They said, let's focus on them. The Democrats are way out of step here.
Well, I'm not sure that's right. I think Americans look at the pictures that you showed of a hospital in Gaza with children lined up on mattresses in the hallway, and they think, we don't want to be party to this. We want to take care of those kids, even if we are very much concerned about standing with Israel.
But the people in Gaza are being held hostage by Hamas. A Hamas surrender solves all these problems.
But, Brad, how difficult is it, though, to see those images and to see the earlier reporting we have about those ambulances? You talk about, the necessity to stand by Israel. But what are the concerns about a wider war here throughout the Middle East with the growing outrage across the Arab world?
Well, there is a real problem with that. And there also is a problem with 8,500 rockets coming from Gaza into Israel since October 7th. And it's the job of President Biden to lead the Western coalition to demand that Iran stop backing Hamas and Hezbollah and that Hamas surrender. The Gazan people can have relief as soon as Hamas surrenders. This is not complicated.
Switching now, Brad, I want to talk to you about, Speaker Johnson and his strategy to get this aid package passed. Do you think that he needs to be worried about playing politics with war here?
No, I think that neither he nor Chuck Schumer are going to do the same thing at the first time. But Congress has always had a pretty strong level of support for Israel. I expect it will again. I would not have thought that the House would pass the same thing the Senate would to start. Mike Johnson has done what he needed to do to get it passed in the House with Republican support. We'll see what the Senate does.
But he's going to go up now against, McConnell. He's going up against the White House. So should he be picking his battles here so early on in his tenure?
Well, if Mitch McConnell can't support cutting IRS agents, then other Republicans need to do it for him. This is not complicated among Republicans, but I think the Senate will do something different, and I think they'll work their differences out.
So, Juanita, NBC News has been reporting that, President Biden could have a difficult time in his hands on the world stage. It's kind of why his administration, there's some concerns within his administration about how to handle this. How does he walk that fine line? How does the president walk this fine line?
I think a big thing we should be watching for is if he places or Congress places any type of conditions on the funding that they will be sending to Israel, or even the humanitarian aid going to Gaza and Israel, the division of that money. It's going to come through signals like that, as well as additional public statements from Biden and Blinken about this, because the more we see footage of ambulances being bombed, the more we see footage of hospitals or communities and refugee camps that are densely populated being bombed, that's absolutely going to have a negative reflection on the president and his administration when the U.S. continues to send resources to the country.
And Susan, I want to turn to you. You know, earlier in this hour, I want to turn now to what the president said in Maine. He made these remarks, his role as consoler in chief. But I also found it interesting that after this, horrific mass shooting where 18 people were killed, it seems different this time than there was literally no talk on Capitol Hill about any sort of, gun legislation. What do you make of that? And are we at a different point in this country, or is it partly because there's just so much chaos on the Hill?
What is the tipping point with these mass shootings? 18 people killed when they go out to bowl or to a bar in Lewiston, Maine. On top of children being slaughtered in classrooms. There is no serious contemplation of additional gun legislation on the Hill, and people didn't even pretend this time that was a prospect.
Especially with Republicans in control of the House. I think that is a big piece here.
Well, Brad, I want to get you to weigh in on this.
Maine has a yellow flag law in place, and this murderer had made it known to the police that he was a threat to others. That, again, shows you, once again, yellow flag law in Maine is a reasonable approach. But gun laws don't stop this. Mental health is the problem. We have people who mean harm to themselves and other people. And that, until we come to grips with that as a country, that we have a mental health crisis and that both parties need to work to solve that together, this is not going to stop.
Juanita, earlier this week, the president has been trying to sell Bidenomics again. He was in Minnesota speaking to rural voters. And this is something that he has had a big problem with over the last couple of years. The Republicans have made incredible gains in 2016, 2020, and then also in the 2022 midterms. And they've been increasingly getting rural support. The president trying to combat that, this 2-week blitz that he's going to have over the next 2 weeks. How do Democrats bridge that divide and win back some of these rural voters, given the fact that the president has had such a difficult time selling his economic policies?
Right. I think it's about trying to give the voters commitments that they can feel, because that's the thing that we've seen with the economic agenda for the Biden administration is that, yes, they've had historic gains, job growth, job creation, and increases in wages for voters. But the question is, what are people feeling in real time? And that's what we see coming up and this negative sentiment about the economy, because if their bank accounts are still struggling, then I think that's a piece of it, not just for rural voters, but voters across the country.
And Brad and Susan, I want to get you to weigh in as we're running out of time here, but the new jobs report out today, last month, 150,000 jobs added, a little less than was expected, but the unemployment rate still under 4%, even though it did go up a little bit. Susan, how does this translate to voters heading into the 2024 election?
Here's the thing that flummoxes the White House. The economy is pretty good. Jobs numbers are terrific. Inflation still a problem, but moderating a bit, and yet President Biden so far gets no credit. And I think their hope is that people eventually feel it in their lives and give him some credit. Yeah. But that has not happened yet.
Brad, I want to give you the last word here.
Well, President Biden intentionally made fuel prices and energy prices more expensive, and they are now intentionally making mortgage rates more expensive. He's not going to get credit as long as things in daily life continue to cost more on purpose.
All right. Thank you so much, Susan, Juanita, and Brad. Thank you so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.